It's my pleasure to welcome today to the webinar Dave Blake, CEO and founder of ClientSuccess. ClientSuccess is a customer success management platform that helps customer success leaders and CSMs retain and grow their customer base. Dave will be the moderator as we walk through today's webinar. I would also like to introduce you to Katie Rogers, Vice President of Customer Success at SalesLoft. SalesLoft helps sales organizations set and execute on a cadence of communication to convert more target accounts to customer accounts. And Eric Boduch, founder at Pendo. Pendo helps companies extend their product to capture all user behavior, gather feedback, and provide contextual help. Welcome to the webinar, everybody.
Thanks, Burke. This is Dave Blake, and again, welcome to this great webinar. I'm honored today to have Katie and Eric join me for this webinar as our guests. Eric and Katie are some of the best SaaS leaders out in the space, and so we're excited to hear from them today, and great friends of our company, ClientSuccess. As Burke mentioned, the topic today around customer success metrics really came through a collaboration with 100 of the top leaders in customer success at a summit called the CS100 Summit. Last September, we hosted the first annual CS100 Summit in Park City, Utah, and gathered the leading customer success executives from around the world. And during part of that, we had a roundtable discussion where we broke up into different groups and everybody shared their top 10 metrics in 4 categories. Today, the credit goes to them. They are co-collaborators with us on this content, and we appreciate their insights and thought leadership. We'd love to have those customer success leaders on the phone join us this year, September 11th through 13th at Sundance Resort in Utah. And for this year's CS100 Summit, and you could go to cs100.clientsuccess.com to get more information. But let's get started. So we're going to walk through, for this webinar, we're going to talk about 4 different categories of metrics. 1 is around financial metrics, 2 around customer health metrics, 3 usage, and 4 team performance metrics. Katie and Eric will join me on and share their best practices and insights and their journey of gathering and reporting and leveraging these metrics as we go through here. And so we'll start with financial metrics right now. There's a lot of financial metrics. During this webinar, we're only going to touch on some of the top ones, and we'll explain them. Some of these metrics you may already know and you may be fully using. Others may be new to you, and some that you'll add to your list. And so in the financial metrics section, we're going to talk about revenue retention and its opposite, revenue churn, customer retention and churn, renewal rates, and quick ratio. So let's start with gross revenue retention. This one is a key metric that everybody should be measuring. It's the percentage of recurring revenue that a company is able to retain for a given period. The importance about revenue retention that you should consider is that some companies look at a net revenue retention number and don't focus on gross revenue retention. And by doing so, they gloss over the challenges that they have with churn within your customer base. So it's really important as you start to build out your financial metrics to look at both gross revenue retention and net. Gross that we talk about now does not include any downsell or churn. It just looks at what revenue you've had during any given period and how much of that you've lost through downsell and churn. The next one that we'll focus on is net revenue retention. Net revenue retention looks at, includes upsell and cross-sell, or what we commonly refer to as expansion revenue. And so as a company, you should look at both. Look at revenue retention from a gross perspective to really understand why your customers are churning, or why your revenue, how that leaky bucket of revenue is being lost, as well as how you're doing in driving expansion within your accounts through a net revenue retention number. The next one is churn. Now, as you know, churn is just the opposite of retention. It just depends on the way that your company likes to look at it. Some may look at it as and communicate a retention number, which is maybe a glass half full, or others may really just focus on the churn metric, which would be more of a glass half empty, and solve those problems. The reason why we talk about net revenue retention in this, and we'll highlight this one, is that this is commonly looks at the offset of churn with expansion revenue, and some people call it negative churn. I know there's a lot of debate of whether that term negative churn is a positive, there's a lot of opinions of who likes to use that churn. I prefer net growth, but a lot of people will look at that and have negative churn. Your goal, of course, as a SaaS company, and the goal of the customer success team, is to drive negative churn, to have more expansion revenue than you have churn each quarter or each time period. The next one is customer churn. So we've talked about revenue churn. Since SaaS revenue is where you typically optimize, you also want to break out and look at customer churn. And we commonly refer to that as logo churn as well. Now, one of the things that you may consider as you look at customer churn versus revenue churn is you may, as a SaaS company, decide that there are unique situations where you may need to optimize around revenue churn. So, for example, if you have 3 customers that were going to churn, and each of them had 5,000 in MRR versus one customer that was 20,000 in MRR, you may choose to put all your efforts to save the one customer that has and save more revenue versus losing 3 logos. The one caveat that you should consider there is the impact of losing logos going out there and having the negative impact from a customer advocacy perspective in the market. So make sure you measure both and optimize to those that bring the most benefit to you and your SaaS company. The next one is gross renewal. So we typically so far we've talked about revenue retention. When we talk about renewal rates, we're talking very specifically to the revenue that we retain as part of a renewable transaction. So whereas you could have a midterm downsell or churn or upsell from a revenue retention standpoint, gross renewal really looks at how much of the initial renewable book of business, we commonly call that RBOB, ends up being renewed in any given period, a month or quarter or a year. Gross renewal rate does not consider expansion. It only considers downsell and churn, and we'll show a chart that kind of visualizes that. And it only considers those dollars that are associated with the renewals. And then the next one is net revenue retention. This net revenue retention does include the expansion revenue. So if you look at a chart, and I'll bring this up. If you look on the far left, you've got your renewable book of business. That's how much revenue is up for renewal during a given quarter. To get gross revenue, you take the churn amount. We had a slight amount of churn. We had some downsell as well, and then you end up getting a gross renewal rate. To get to the net renewal rate, you walk back up the waterfall chart. You look at any upsell, and in this example, there was no cross-sell, and you end up getting your net renewal rate. In this example, you could forecast both, how much we've actually closed. We've got 35% so far this quarter, and how much you're forecasting. But you're forecasting an 89% gross renewal rate, and so on and so forth. So this is a good example of a typical waterfall chart that would be very helpful to help you visualize and understand how you're doing from a renewal rate perspective any given month or any given quarter. And then the final one we're going to touch on is one we call quick ratio. It's actually created by Mahmoud Hamid, who is a venture capitalist at Social Capital. Quick ratio measures the efficiency of growth within a SaaS company. So it compares all revenue growth versus revenue churn. Revenue growth, it compares new and expansion, and versus downsell and churn MRR. And so if you look at a typical, if you do sorry, I'll go back. If you calculate this calculation where you've got the new and expansion MRR divided by downsell and churn MRR, you get a number. And the numbers, if you calculate those month by month, and this is just an example for this discussion, a quick ratio number of that is less than 2. So This one is under 2, is bad growth. It's unhealthy growth. It's not sustainable. Any quick ratio number that's between 2 and 4 would be healthy growth. It's okay. It's fine. But anything above, any quick ratio above 4 is very healthy. It's great growth. And so you might want to, as a company, calculate your quick ratio and track that and see how that changes over time. All right, now we're going to jump into health, and this is customer health metrics. And to do this, I'm going to actually, we're going to cover a handful of best practice health metrics. We'll talk about a little bit about product usage, product adoption, customer engagement, customer pulse, and net promoter score. I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about these first 2, product usage and product stickiness.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it, and thanks for the great intro. First, I guess we'll talk here about product usage. So, we define that, or the way it's defined here, is unique users today over unique users over the last 30 days. Now, one thing I would recommend as you're looking at this now is the time periods you look at really are going to be specific to you. So it's not just a matter of, okay, users today over users over the last 30 days. It might be that, users this week over users the last month is more important to you. The perspective, the thing you have to think about here is understanding what's really important in your application and tracking that product usage over time. And really this metric too is a stat you want to chart, right? You want to chart how it changes over time. That gives you good visibility into the health of your product, as opposed to just like looking at one single instance over time. And then you'll get a better understanding of, is it users today over users over the month, or is it really weekly users that you want to know over monthly users, or is it even monthly users over yearly users? Every product is a little bit different, but what's important is you figure out the ratio that you want to track, and then from there, chart that over time. Hopefully the ratio becomes closer to what you want it to be, or what you expect it to be, as opposed to worse. So the charting is probably the most important part of that. Second thing to think about is stickiness. Stickiness is really important, especially when you worry about things like churn and renewal rates, expansion, upsell. So for us, we like to think about, what are our most important features? Like for, in Pendo, it's, do people do things like do in-app NPS? Do they do segmented guides where they target guides at specific segments of their customer base? If they're doing those types of things, those are 2 key features, 2 value features we look at. Others are things like paths and funnels. And then we look at them over total features. How much of these key sticky features are they using? Are they using the features that really show engagement with our product or not? And we track that over time too, how that changes. Obviously, you want that to keep getting better and better. And it's a great indicator for adoption, which obviously is a great indicator for renewals.
Great, thanks, Eric. I'll touch a little bit on the customer engagement. So the next metric is around customer engagement. And this is really just, I always say that the 2 most important areas to focus on are around engagement, but it's engagement with your product and engagement with your team. Customer engagement is measuring in whatever way that's most appropriate to you, how often you're talking with customers and how often they're engaging with you. So that may be a combination of email, phone, meetings, or chat. When I was around customer success for Omniture and Adobe, we actually came up with our own metric called DELT, D-E-L-T. It was director and executive level touches, that we were measuring how often our CSMs were able to engage with people, with executive sponsors and higher level individuals in the company, and had a simple metric and algorithm around that. But it's all about, are your customers engaging with you? Is that engagement velocity picking up, or is it declining? And then to remember 2 main things. One is to embrace your most vocal customers, because they are the ones that want to engage with you. They're the ones who care about your business and will provide some of the best feedback. And then be very beware of your silent customers, because as soon as your silent customers are those who may be disengaging from the product and the relationship. And so make sure that you find creative ways to engage those and see how your engagement's trending over time. I'm going to turn over to Katie to talk a little bit about the next one, as pulse from the CSM.
Hey everyone, really excited to be on today. Dave and team, thank you so much for having me. In terms of, the pulse from the customer, when we think about our CSMs, they're on the front line, building those relationships, driving adoption, and at times helping customers overcome challenges. And so really what this metric is all about is the numbers of customer in each status, by ARR, and then what are the reasons? And so Dave's got a slide coming up next with some beautiful visuals, but we've been able to implement this at SalesLoft, and it helps us understand, from our CSM sentiment, what's going on versus what our usage metrics may say. And so Dave, I'd love for you to showcase that next slide because of beautiful visuals.
You bet. So as Katie said, you definitely want to get input back from your customers. If you only use a purely data-driven approach, you could get a false positive or a false negative on the overall health with your customer base. The best practices that we recommend as you gain insight from your CSM is to make sure that you look at it in different ways. And so one is having clear definitions of what each status of pulse. Some may do just a pure 3 status, red, yellow, green. This example uses a 6 color status, but really make sure you have a defined definition across your team. Make sure that your CSMs know that setting a customer at severe risk is not going to punish them. It's calling the cavalry in. It's calling for help. That's actually a positive thing, is to make sure that you're on top of that. And then to make sure that you categorize things in reason codes so that you know across your business what are the key areas you need to improve as a business to improve the customer experience. So have clear definitions, ensure that your pulse is updated on a regular basis, and make sure you capture reason codes and notes so that you can focus in and collaborate across your company to drive improved experience for your customers.
And also,
the next one is, yeah, go ahead.
If we were to go back, I think one thing, empowering CSMs on the front line, this gives them a clear indicator of where they should be spending some of their time. If they have red, orange, yellow, or the light green there, those are the area for opportunities. And so for my team, they're always asking, how should I be prioritizing accounts? What does this look like? The customer pulse really helps them align with that and understand the priority there.
Great. Net Promoter Score. Katie and Eric are both going to share their thoughts on this metric.
So I'll jump straight in here. I think in terms of Net Promoter Score, this is something SalesLoft has actively been tracking over the past 3.5 years. And for us, it basically, the customer has a pop-up that comes up in-app, and it's simply a message that says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer SalesLoft to your friends or family. And so you can see here down on the bottom right, you have your detractors, your promoters, and those your passives there in the middle. And for us, as we get the Net Promoter Scores coming in, we typically space it out on a 90-day interval. But at the end of the day, we're replying to any and every score with a comment on it. And so that's been, certainly an item that we've tried to scale as our customer base has grown bigger. But at the end of the day, it's an indicator of overall health of the account, but it's not the end all be all. And so use it as helpful ways to impact and drive results. But know that if one user says, hey, this isn't working for me, that's not the overall sentiment of the customer account.
Yeah, and I would just love to add to what Katie said. I mean, it's a great tool to be able to use an app. It's a great tool to be able to use with segments, right? So you might want to analyze Net Promoter Score across different segments in different ways. Like we'll do it by customer type, by role of user. We find that, our core audience are product people. Product people are particularly happy with our product. Some of the other Net Promoter Scores, while good, aren't as, in the 50s. So it's very interesting to see as you start segmenting your users, what data you get out of NPS too. You can do it by things like revenue, look at different ARRs, cut and slice and dice that data that way. Really interesting data you can end up getting. We also just use it for features. So you can do really cool things if you have back-end data with features like wait 30 days after someone starts using a new feature you announced, and then NPS the feature and see what you get. It doesn't work as well if you NPS it to everyone, including people that haven't used the new feature. But if you can target and segment, you can get really good data, on specific areas of your product, just not the whole product. So you can use it in a lot of different ways. Whole product, you can slice and dice and look at NPS and segments, and you can look at it even for, specific functional or feature areas of your product.
Great. Thank you. So let's move on to the next section. The next section is all about product usage. There's the top metrics that were identified by the CS100 included two we've already talked about, product usage and adoption. So we won't go over that. But let's start with Katie, who will dig in a little bit on license utilization and how they look at that at SalesLoft.
Absolutely. So in terms of license utilization, at SalesLoft, we have teams of all different sizes. And so if someone comes on and purchases, say, 100 seats at X company, what we really want to know is, of those 100 seats they purchased, how many are in active use today? And so it helps us ramp our larger customers onto SalesLoft a lot faster, but also understand if there are potential blockers internally, and we can help work through that. So being able to monitor this, especially as your accounts start to grow larger over time, is really key, because it helps you understand what you need to do, but also where there may be some kinks in terms of your process and what you can help iron out and make more clear for the customer over time.
Yeah, this is Dave. The other key area around license utilization is identifying areas of upsell and potentially risk from downsell. If you allow users to be added, if they add seats, there's a couple ways that people do it. One is they'll just charge for every new seat and let your customers add seats. The others allow, and then they reconcile later. And so this is a good way to identify risk and opportunity to grow the account. The next one we want to touch on was time spent in product. And as we talked a little bit and Eric touched on previously, product-related metrics vary by every SaaS company has a slightly different profile of how their customers use their product. Same with time spent. This just looks at how many minutes or hours users are spending in your product. Some companies may have a platform where they look at having their users in there every day, all day. It's their primary platform. Salesforce would be that case for sales users. They would expect them to be in there all day, every day. We, as Customer Success Solutions, are the similar. Other platforms, though, may have where users are logging in once a week, and that's considered a good thing or good usage. And so you really just need to baseline that and determine what your baseline for your SaaS company, and then measure it from there and trend that over time to see if you're able to drive that metric up. The next one we want to talk, I'm going to let Katie and Eric both give some of their thoughts on here around outcomes achieved. Katie, do you want to share your thoughts on outcomes achieved? This is really about measuring the key outcomes that your customers are accomplishing within your product.
Absolutely. Sorry, guys, I was on mute and I was talking away and didn't even realize it. But yeah, in terms of outcomes achieved, I know. So in terms of outcomes achieved, I think the biggest thing is understanding what your customer goals are when they come on board. And so that means, really healthy handoffs from the account executive or sales team. But at the end of the day, like you can see, Dave has some examples here, deals closed, subscription and billing, marketing automation, leads created. For us at SalesLoft, we want to understand what are the customer goals, and those are going to vary between customers. And so having segments and potentially trying to group by those goals in your segments can be a possible way to achieve this at a faster pace. But at the end of the day, you really got to look at, what is the ROI our customers are hoping to gain from our product or platform, and then be able to rally the customer experience around that to achieve it at a faster rate if possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to talk about it. At Pendo and with our customers, we look at a lot of different outcomes too. I can tell some interesting stories, I guess, there. Some of our customers look at using our product to help with support ticket deflection, right? So they get a lot of calls into support, or some segment of calls into support. So what they'll do with our product is go back and track, like, how did this person progress through the application that drove them to a support call? So they'll actually look at, the path people take to support calls. What gets them to click on the support button, and they'll start analyzing what got them there. And from there, they try to guide people to a solution. So if someone, for instance, always struggles creating landing pages because they forget to create a list first, well, maybe you just pop up a little guide right when the list should be created and said, hey, click here right now to create a list because you're going to need it for this landing page, for the form submittal. So we have a lot of people looking at outcomes achieved that way. Support ticket deflection is a great, example of that. They want to limit the number of support calls, so they'll go back and analyze paths and funnels. They'll look at the customers, and then they'll use in-app messaging and guides to help them solve the problem without having to contact support. So that's one interesting example of outcomes. We also have people that do things like trial conversions, right? They want to optimize their trial conversions. So what they'll end up doing is they'll analyze data. They'll look at green trials, what we talk about as successful trials. What features did they use in those trials? How quickly are they onboarded? And then they'll compare that data with the data they have from product usage on unsuccessful trials, or what I like to refer to as red trials. The cool thing here is you can then do two things. A, if trials, people use the spell check feature, for instance, are likely to convert and buy your product. Well, 2 weeks into a 30-day trial, you probably want to pop up some information about spell check, take them through the feature if they haven't used it. If they've already used it, then you obviously don't want to interrupt their flow with that. So that's one cool thing to be able to do to affect an outcome. The second thing is you start pushing people right from the beginning. If you know that a green customer does these things in order, you can tailor your onboarding to make sure that you help them achieve those things early in a trial. So just different ways you can look at outcomes, analyze good outcomes, analyze bad outcomes, incentivize the good outcomes, the outcomes you want, help alleviate the bad outcomes, and just use data and guidance inside your application to achieve that.
Great, thanks, Eric. I'm going to actually have you do this next one as well. Talk a little bit about features. It may be a little bit overlap there, but any other insights you have about looking at top features used?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we spend a lot of time looking at is, what features are used by whom. We often find, and our customers often find, that there's some unexpected results. You might find out if you're tracking this information effectively and comparing, all of your features with each other, that you might see interesting patterns you didn't expect. And that data can then help you prioritize how your product roadmap changes, where you spend your engineering resources. You might find, especially if you do a good job of segmentation, that a lot of, say, your enterprise customers or your larger customers use features that your smaller customers don't. And then based upon your overall company strategy, maybe that means you want to allocate more engineering resources to the feature areas that enterprise uses more, if your strategy is to sell more into the enterprise. If it's the other way, you might want to focus engineering resources directly on features that are used by the smaller companies. So a lot of it ends up becoming, how you utilize data, how you guide people, and how you use this data and guidance information to prioritize engineering, to develop more features that are important to your customer base. Dave?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I found this to be great to double down on those features that are providing the most value to the customers, and maybe determining if there's any features that should be maybe even sunsetted from the platform. That's good that we've covered the usage section, and now we're moving right along to the last section. And then just a reminder, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So if you have specific questions around any of these metrics or sections, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A feature within Zoom, and we'll touch on those at the end. So team metrics. There's a lot of different team metrics. We'll touch on a few of how to measure teams. There's a few that we will touch on here: quarterly renewal, expansion, net revenue retention, onboarding, average onboarding time, and average time to first value. I'll touch first on quarterly gross renewal rate. I'm a big believer in measuring CSMs on retention and growth. And so if CSMs may have a variable comp plan of say 75 base and 25 variable, I would do the same thing for comp plan for, I would use that same variable and say that we'll measure CSMs that of the variable portion, 75% of that will be on retention and 25% will be on growth. And so for the retention portion, I like to use quarterly gross renewal rate, and a lot of the leaders that we polled also like this. This is looking at what was up for renewal in a given quarter. It may be in a given month. We call that the renewable book of business, and what actually renewed, not including the expansion revenue that was closed in the deal. This is a good way to really focus on what's most important for them. Is it's in driving value and ensuring that their customers renew. And this number may be owned by CSMs, or it may be owned by sales or a renewal specialist, but this is a key number that we like to measure. Katie, I'll let you talk about quarterly expansion revenue.
Absolutely. And so you can see, how we comprise that makeup here of quarterly expansion down in the bottom with blue. It's total expansion revenue divided by the quarter. And so I think the big thing here is, understanding what is the role of your CS team and how CS impacts the expansion revenue. One of the things that we do here at SalesLoft is for strategic, large, say upgrades or cross-sells, we are bringing in the sales team. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking at is, of those expansion revenue opportunities, how many came from the success team being able to create those opportunities within, may not be strategizing and actually closing the deal. And so those are just different ways, I think, from a quarterly expansion revenue. We absolutely track that. Not all of that is, solidified by the CS team, because our sales team does get involved, but tracking it and understanding where the origin is happening and how those opportunities are created is really key, because it just helps the company obviously expand revenue over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say, I'll just add a little bit to that. I always say customers who are buying more from you are very likely to renew. And so I always look at our customer success teams, and I have them take a very offensive approach to understanding key business objectives, aligning to those. And if we're doing our job well, then customers are buying more, they're retaining, and we should also be the biggest lead generation source for sales reps if sales owns this expansion revenue. So those are key. How do you look at net revenue retention a little bit differently there, Katie? Is there any other insights that you would have if we look at this metric?
Yeah, I think this is really important because it's slightly different. It's the starting MRR, and so we just started our second quarter on May 1st, and I went over with each CSM. What does your starting MRR or ARR look like? And we were able to say, here are some areas where maybe we weren't as successful in Q1. How do we avoid those in Q2? And so I think looking at, the expansion number is really great, but that revenue retention, just like you said earlier, a key focus of our role here in customer success is retaining. And so how are we doing that? What does it look like from previous quarters? Giving your CSMs insight into this and really digging into what is that downsell and churn number? What do those look like? What customers are they comprised of? It really helps us be as proactive as possible in upcoming quarters. And now they know where those little red flags or yellow flags are, and they can easily avoid them and really just deal with whatever challenges or obstacles that come in a much more proactive way, because now they're aware. And so with this number, we actively track it, but it's also reviewing what that means within each CSM's book of business, so that way they can really be an expert moving forward. And I think awareness is really key. We've been able to do this now for the past 3 quarters, and we see less and less from a downsell and churn perspective, because CSMs know how to engage and really know what to do because they've had that experience, and we deep dive into this.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I'll turn to Eric on this one. Eric, a key metric that a lot of teams look at is average onboarding time. How do you look at that at Pendo, or what do you see as best practices, and how do you balance the speed versus customer need?
Yeah, sure. So we like to define the key onboarding steps first, and we tell the same thing to our clients, is understand, what things need to be covered in onboarding to get a sticky customer, it's really about getting customers so that they are getting value from your product as quickly as possible. So we track that, and we tell customers to track that. How long does it take them to get through these key tasks? In which case you'd consider them onboarded, at least initially onboarded. Track that information, and it's interesting if you start experimenting with that. Like we had one customer that had a certain number of days to onboard, and he had a pretty big variance between his customer base, and he started dividing them up into segments. Like to start with, just did two simple segments, what he called quick to onboard and then what he called normal to onboard. And then he looked at the retention of those customers over time. And interestingly, in his case, he found that one of his biggest factors for retention was how quickly they went through the onboarding process. So the quicker they got through onboarding, the more likely they were to retain, continue to be customers, and actually had huge opportunities for upsell too. So interesting data he ended up getting and tracking there, and insights he was able to see by just tracking, okay, onboarding time for particular segments of customers. And in his case, quicker to onboard meant significant increases in retention rate. So I think, the important thing there is track it over time and start seeing if you can see any patterns. Have your product team, your CS team look at it for different patterns that they might be able to analyze and say, oh, if we change this about our onboarding practice, we might see this results based upon data of that particular segment. So there's lots of cool things you can find out there.
Yeah, we always say that the first 90 days of a relationship, this onboarding experience really defines the relationship long term. And so not only measuring that and tracking that, but really trying to improve that customer experience right from day one. That first experience is really important.
Absolutely, and you'll find too that you might find over time that new features are more important, and you need to make sure to integrate them into your onboarding experience and add to that. And the more you look at data, you might determine new things about onboarding, whether it's quickness, how quickly you want to get through the onboarding process, or whether you're emphasizing the right things. So it's onboarding is an ongoing activity. You have to keep teaching customers about new features so you can keep driving reoccurring value for them and get reoccurring revenue for you.
Yeah, great. Katie, I want to get your thoughts on average time to first value. I know this is sometimes hard for companies to measure, but how do you think about that at SalesLoft?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we've, for the past year, I'd say in early 2016 is where we really broke CS out to customer success managers and onboarding specialists. And so we have a true onboarding team today because we found that, the average time to onboard and average time to first value were really important. And just as Eric said, it led to increased adoption, increased retention, and increased ROI for SalesLoft at the end of the day. And so I think for here, the total number of days between onboarding and first value divided by the number of customers. And so that's how it's measured out. But the first value can potentially mean something different to customers. So again, we've segmented our customer base and somewhat aligned that first value of what it could be for each of those segments. And so for smaller companies, it's simply getting the tool operational, and being able to send out emails, make phone calls for their reps, as where others, they're really more focused. And so it's building out the customized approach for their internal teams to operate. And so I think just understanding whether you're dealing with very small business, SMB, commercial, or enterprise, what that first value could be and aligning for that. And then obviously, like Eric said, going back because it's continuous. It's ever evolving and ever changing as your product and customer base grows.
Yeah, I love that because, as you said, every customer has a different definition of value. And sometimes we can tend to focus on the setup steps and the implementation steps, but there's sometimes when you do very little and just focus on having that first win and provide much more value to the customer versus kind of getting through the implementation. And so this is a critical metric to try to measure across your teams. Well, those are some of the highlights. And again, we talked about some financial health, usage, and team metrics. We only touched on a few, so we'll be publishing a white paper that will go into depth of others. But as we wind down and move into the Q&A, there's a couple things we want to emphasize. And Katie and Eric and I have all been through this process. Is that really start simple. As you try to pull together your metrics portfolio, if you will, focus on just one or two or three in each category. There's a lot of metrics that you could implement. Focus on a few initially, get the baseline and trend it, and just look month by month, are you improving over time and taking steps to improve those metrics over time. Make sure you discuss it and you're completely aligned with your executive team. Hopefully they're leading these initiatives, but if they aren't, then pull them in and show with data how it can really impact the business. Look at data collection. A lot of it is do you have your product? Are you using a product like Pendo? Have you instrumented your product to capture some of these usage metrics? Do you have other methods to collect the data and then report on it? And make sure, like I said, baseline them and just take slow incremental improvements. And then finally, roll it out to the rest of the company. We believe that customer success is not a culture. It is not a department. It's a company culture. And so, sorry, it is a culture. And so the best companies out there leverage data to mobilize the rest of their company and have them care about customers and engage with customers and solve problems for customers. So roll it out to your team and your company and make sure that you track it on a weekly basis. Those are some key things to just start this process and this journey of having a great metrics portfolio. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Burke, and looks like there's several questions that have been submitted. If anybody has more, feel free to submit that now. And Burke, I'll let you lead a Q&A session.
I appreciate that, Dave. Great job. It's been great to hear the feedback we've gotten. Once again, you can use the Q&A tab to actually answer questions. But I'm going to take it. I've been taking these questions and putting back in the sections that you've asked them to. So first, let me ask a question to Dave, and you can maybe, or Katie or Eric, you let me know who wants to answer this. But this is from Nick. He said the metrics for renewal, churn, etc. at the start of the webinar, those were discussed. How should I use these metrics to make decisions? The math doesn't seem difficult, but what actions should I be taking?
Yeah, no, this is Dave. I'll take that. Yeah, I think that you're right. The whole purpose of these metrics is to drive action throughout the organization. It's not just to have the metrics there, and the metrics do no good if you're not using the data to drive action throughout the organization. And so, you know, at least my recommendation on all of these metrics, and particularly with the financial one is getting a good handle on them, and then using them to drive change and improvements throughout your business. If your renewal rate is great, well, how do you improve it more? Can you drive even more expansion revenue and improve it more? If you have high churn, how do you just take incremental steps to reduce churn month over month or quarter over quarter? And so my suggestion is measure them and then share them and help be a catalyst within your organization to drive change throughout the organization.
I think one thing to add on top of that is measure them, and then dig into the data. Where is it coming from? Is it certain segments of customers? When is that happening in the customer life cycle? You know, the high level metric is great, but it's really up to us as CS leaders and customer success managers to dig in and do the dirty work to figure out where this is happening, why it's happening, and what we can do to improve them.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that too, is just, you know, work it into your process. Capture data, capture metrics, feed it to your customer success system and the workflow there, and then use that system to trigger actions. So those actions might be a phone call. You know, say this person has, you know, a customer that was really healthy, had tons of daily active users, you know, hasn't logged in now in 30 days. Well, that's a problem. Hopefully before that 30-day period, you've triggered based on that data in your customer success workflow an action for your CSM to give them a call and see what's up, see if they're having issues, see if there's problems with the company, see if they're not happy with the product. Try to jump on that immediately when you see usage habits changing. Same thing, you could be triggering things in application. We do new feature announcements. So you have data. It could say that, we announced the feature 30 days ago that we know is really important to financial services as a segment. We can pull up all the financial services customers that haven't used it. And you might want to have, instead of a CSM reaching out to them in this case, you might just want to trigger an in-app guide saying, hey, we announced this feature 30 days ago. We understand it could help you solve this problem that's core to your business. Let us walk you through how to do it. And you can do that all automated in your application. So I think the big thing to think about is capture the data, feed it into your customer success workflow, and then that workflow can trigger actions, whether that's a CSM doing something, whether that's something happening in your product, whether that's an email that gets sent out. That process, you just want to feed data into and manage.
Thanks a lot. That's great. Let's move on to maybe another area of the presentation. There was a question, and this was by Zubar, and talking a little bit about customer engagement. He talked a little bit about, or his question was regarding how do you establish an algorithm around customer engagement, and then he discussed that he believes that engaging in executives is really important. So maybe your thoughts on how do you actually create an algorithm, or maybe a simple formula to know when to, or how effective you are in your customer engagement, and then maybe your thoughts on engaging with executives.
Yeah, this is Dave. There's a couple ways to look at engagement. I think just generally there's a concept that we have that we call engagement velocity or momentum. Is the engagement moving in a positive direction? Is the cadence frequent, etc.? The one that I mentioned in the presentation was around DELT. Again, it was a simple acronym for director and executive level touches. And what we did is we had a simple thing that said our goal was to get our CSMs out of their comfort zone and speaking with higher level individuals through these enterprise accounts. And so we would measure the number of unique DELTs, new relationships that they've established at a director or above, and also the frequency. And so unique and then frequency. But we also built into that algorithm the type of engagement, whether it was email, phone, or in-person meeting. Obviously, in-person meeting would have a little bit higher weight because of the level of rich engagement. And then also whether it was a business or technical source. And so we wanted to really optimize for business resources. And so we did a simple metric like that. It was our own little unique algorithm, but it actually transformed our organization. It really did. Whereas before we started measuring this, our team was really focused on and engaging at the end user and manager level. And then over a period of time, we started having much deeper and relationships through these enterprise accounts. So that's just one way.
One thing we've done at SalesLoft as well is simply bringing in those C-level or strategic level executives on a business review once a year while we run them quarterly for some of our accounts, getting that buy-in at that higher level and just explaining at the start of the journey as a customer comes on board that, hey, once a year, we'd love to be able to sync with you and your, direct report. So that way we get our front line, we get our executive level, and we're reaching that C-level as well. And that's helped, I would just say in the past 6 months, we've really started to implement it. And the questions that they're asking, the things that they're wanting to know have helped us as a company, get to the next stage. And it's opened our eyes to what the needs are at different levels throughout a business. And so if it's not, a regular touch, know that you can set the tone and do it on an annual basis. So they get small doses of you and your company, but make sure they always have a very large ROI when you do that.
Yeah, and I would say for internal use, I mean, if you're tracking NPS, providing that on a monthly basis, having a slide that maybe segments NPS by different, important segments to you, delivering that to your executives on a monthly basis, also delivering any kind of usage or engagement reports or data to them on a monthly basis, but coming up with a set slide or set, slide that contains visualizations or data that you can use month over month and show trending over time is a great thing to increase visibility with executives.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Let's move into another area. I know, and keep the questions coming. If your question isn't answered, we're going to gather all of these questions and make sure they get answered, and we'll send them to the groups. So keep your questions coming. If your question doesn't get answered in the next 7 minutes, we'll make sure that you actually get a nice response from the panel group here of professionals. Let me talk a little bit about MPS. So one of the big questions that David had was, and I'll even bring in Dark. So also David and Dark, what is the best practice for dealing with silent customers, and how can you improve MPS return rates?
That silent customer. Oh, is that Katie? Do you want to go ahead on that one?
I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm happy to chime in after.
Silent customers, it's a tough one. And I think the main thing is actually Kyle Porter, Katie, I liked what your CEO said one time, is to try to catch them out of in a I can't remember how he said it, but to kind of jolt them to and surprise them with value. Yeah, to action, to where they may not be responding for a while. And how do you do that? It may be creative in sending them something of value to them, whether it be a blog post that specifically relates to their business, or you've solved a problem for them. But really, it's just being creative in not being afraid also to just pick up the phone, the old school way of picking up the phone and calling them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think at SalesLoft, in terms of, silent customers, the big thing there is you've got to think email boxes are overloaded. And so from an email perspective, if your subject line doesn't stand out, more often than not, it's likely going to get archived or deleted or just forgotten and pushed down the list. And so at SalesLoft, we tweet, we send packages, but when we do stick to the email front or a phone call, we're going back to what they said the initial value would be of SalesLoft, and showing them how their reps inside of the platform today are achieving that. And I think the big thing is going with the value statement and the action of what's been done. Or if it's a blog post, to try to drive that re-engagement, find something of value. More often than not, when we send something that's customized, and yes, it does take a little bit more time, but if they're silent, more often than not, they're likely to churn or downgrade. By putting that small time investment there, we have a very high success rate on re-engaging, we call them dark accounts. And so we're bringing them back to the light and driving their success. And so getting creative, and do not be afraid to pick up the phone. I heavily want to echo what Dave said there.
Yeah, and I don't know if it needs a third, but I'll add a third voice on top of that. I mean, pick up the phone. I mean, if they aren't replying to emails, pick up the phone. Try to engage them across all these different mechanisms, to get their feedback, and provide them something of value. It might just be an announcement of a training you're doing in their area, or a meetup, or whatever it happens to be that you think might be important to them. But try to get them engaged. Don't hesitate to pick up the phone. I've often heard CEOs ask their CS people, well, they haven't engaged if we tried to call them, and the answer being no. So picking up the phone is always a great start to reach out to the silent majority, or the silent group, hopefully minority.
That's great. I think that this may be our last question. Once again, we'll cover these questions that you've asked in the Q&A section in a post email to you. But this is regarding usage on the product. So there was a question that came from Jenny that said, how frequent should the analysis of top features be done? For example, should it be month to month? What are your thoughts on that?
I can start with that one. I think, if you can look at that data, if you have that data in a format where you can look at it whenever you want it, that's probably the best thing. Because then whenever a question comes up, you can just have the data at your fingertip. But I would definitely compare different segments, month to month at a minimum, and just keep track of the trending of the usage of those features. Identify any accounts that, where their usage changes, particularly in a negative direction, so you can escalate that appropriately. But month to month is a great way to do it. On an ideal environment, you just have that data, constantly updating in an interface to be able to look at it.
That's great. Maybe just let me follow that up with another question. There's a few people that have asked, how do you measure these? What are the types of tools someone could measure usage with. Maybe Dave, you can talk a little bit about measuring these metrics, maybe in a customer success platform. But how should everyone start measuring? What tools should they be looking for to measure these metrics?
Yeah, I think Eric's tool, Pendo, is a great tool to do that. Their solution is all about product usage and walkthroughs and measurement. And so Pendo is an excellent solution out there that people should consider, and customer success solutions like ours capture that information as well. It really just depends on what's the easiest for you, and finding the right measurement ability for your platform and your company.
Oh, shucks, Dave.
Hey, well, we appreciate everyone being involved with the webinar today. We're grateful for all the great questions and participations. Once again, we want to thank Dave, Katie, and Eric for spending time with us. We are very passionate about helping drive customer success as a culture. It's not just a department, it's a team effort. And being able to take these metrics and get them aligned with the entire organization will help us build better products and better services, which definitely helps the world out. So we appreciate everyone for joining in. You will receive a recorded version of this webinar with all these commentary and questions. And look for our ebook that will have not only these top 5 customer success metrics, but runners up. And if you're an executive looking for one of the best conferences, please join us at the CS100 2017 in Sundance. And if you've never been to Sundance, Utah, it's worth the travel. One of the prettiest places to be in the fall. And you can see that, you can learn more at cs100.clientsuccess.com. Thanks again for everyone. And we'll see you in our next webinar next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.